Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey in Your Own Backyard. I'm Rob, your host, and today I'm excited to be joined, and I say joined by, I'm actually at your house, to be able to come over and spend some time with Wade Woodard and just chit-chat a little bit about bourbon and him educate me a little bit on what I'm drinking, why I'm drinking, what I'm paying for it, where it comes from, all that fun stuff. So, Wade, how you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thanks for coming over.
Yeah.
Thanks for the wine that you brought here tonight.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't bring you bourbon, man. I mean, what the hell do you bring a guy who has everything?
I might be able to educate you on a little bit on bourbon, but I got a feeling you could educate me a lot on wine.
I don't know. It's a good balance.
Two-way street.
Yeah, it's a nice trade-off. So, well, let's just jump right in. You're going to help me out with just kind of understanding. I mean, just you tell me. I'm not going to try to explain it. Tell me what's going on, Wade. What are we going to do?
We're going to drink a little bourbon today out of my bunker. Okay. We're going to talk bourbon. We're just going to have like a kind of a normal whiskey get-together with whiskey geeks talking about whiskey is kind of the way I look at it. So maybe there's a few things that I can explain along the way. And
it's going to be more than a few.
So I kind of wanted to start with one of my favorite everyday drinker products. I pretty much always have a bottle over at my house is Wild Turkey 101.
Okay.
$35 for a 1.75 liter handle. It's mostly a blend of 6 to 8 year old whiskeys. It's technically non-age dated, but you can tell by drinking it that it's over 4 years old, which is for a whiskey that to optionally have an age statement, it has to be at least 4 years old. If any whiskey sold in America, if it's under 4 years old, have to have an age statement. So you'll see sometimes like Irish whiskeys or even some low-end Scotch whiskeys, they'll have an age statement on the label that says like age 36 months. Because if it's under 4 in America, you have to have it. But even though that's not a requirement over in Scotland,
right?
It is in America.
And if it's under 4, it can't be a bourbon, right?
No.
What is the rule on that?
Bourbon doesn't have to have any age on it whatsoever. It has to go into a new charred oak container.
Okay.
Container, for practical purposes, is a barrel.
Right.
But you could put it in there and dump it out and call it a bourbon. Now, why people don't do that is at that point, it wouldn't taste good. It's going to be tasting like white dog. It's not going to change at all.
Okay.
And you just use that barrel. And bourbon barrels can only be used once. So you took a $250 barrel and then turned it into a used barrel, which is now worth $125. So you just kind of throw away $125.
Gotcha.
So nobody really does that. But there are producers that age less than 4 years.
Okay.
And if you're using smaller barrels like some craft distillers do, definitely you can start picking up age before 4 years old.
And so I'm guessing, depending on where you distill your bourbon, weather, climate, conditions, things like that kind of dictate how long you might want to leave it in the barrel?
That has a big factor in it. But getting back to the age statement, there is kind of 2 points that I need to make is there's straight bourbon, okay? And straight bourbon for any straight whiskeys means that it's been aged a minimum of 2 years.
Okay.
So if you ever see Kentucky straight bourbon whiskey or Texas straight bourbon whiskey, you know it's at least 2. Now, if it's under 4, it still has to have that age statement.
Okay.
But then once it hits 4 years old, age statements become optional.
Okay.
So.
Okay.
Anyway, what I wanted to start with today was current Wild Turkey 101, which I think is, just a solid, great pour. Hits all the bourbon notes I'm typically looking for, caramel, vanilla. Doesn't have any too rough edges to it. So I think it's a great value. But also, Wild Turkey from the 80s. This is a 1989 bottle of Wild Turkey 101. So, kind of the same whiskey, but made... How many years later is that? 31 years later? 2020, 1989? Yeah.
So obviously, process, equipment, all philosophy, all kinds of things have changed in that amount of time.
Well, the Wild Turkey Distillery has been bought and sold a couple of times since then. It's now owned by Campari Group, which makes Campari and Aperol and a bunch of other, but it's an Italian-based company. But also in the 2000s, Wild Turkey did some things in their production that I think kind of made a difference. They gradually increased their barrel entry proof. They were one of the lowest at the time And they still are low compared to some others. So the maximum allowed by law is 125 proof.
Right.
Currently, Wild Turkey's is around 114, but back then it was more like 107. So if you're trying to squeeze out everything you can out of a barrel, you go at a higher proof. But I think there's some compromises that makes with the product quality of how it tastes.
Okay.
So that's one difference. Another thing is back then they use large wooden cypress fermenting tanks.
Okay.
And now they're stainless steel or metal or some other type, but they're no longer wood. And the producers like to use metal because they're easier to clean. But the cypress, even though you couldn't get them all clean, there's something that stayed in them that I think contributed to the overall flavor of the product. So there's a bunch of little changes, and they really changed their still. They put in a new column still. I'd have to look at the timeline, but maybe like 2006. So they totally changed their still. So anyway, let's pour a couple of these. And
so we're going to do side-by-side comparison?
Yeah, we'll do side by side.
Okay. And you're one of many, and I'm going to be honest with you, this will be the first time I've ever had Wild Turkey 101. Never had it. And you're the first of many, I'm not the first of many, I should say. You're not the first of many to tell me that I'm missing out. Wild Turkey is kind of where it's at. That's kind of the benchmark, the standard.
That's the 101. That's the current product,
That's
so we'll
current.
taste that one first. Yeah, and if you want to go up a step, the Wild Turkey Rare Breed, to me, in the mid-40 price point, is an absolutely incredible bourbon for that price point.
Yeah, I've heard that too, and I need to jump in and get a bottle.
Have you had some of the Rustler's Reserve barrel picks at least?
Those I have.
Okay.
One that you picked.
Okay.
But didn't you do the Sweet 99?
The Sweet 99. I was one of 3 guys that helped pick that. So Greg
That one's
Granger and Bart
fantastic.
Bogus and myself helped pick that one. So
That one in the H-Town I've had.
okay.
Nice on the nose.
I like it, 101 proof. That's kind of my ideal kind of sweet spot of drinking is probably 100 to 110. Above 110, to be honest with you, if I'm drinking some monster, like a Stag that's 140, I might try a little sip neat, but I'm more than likely to add some water to it.
Sure.
But at this point, I can sip this neat all day long without anything added to it.
And I'm going to tell you, shame on me, man. I've seen this and heard people talk about it and never pulled the trigger on buying some and taking a sip, and I'm going, that's really good.
Yeah, I'm just worried that they won't have a big price increase. They did just announce or cleared a label for a new label design for the product, which sometimes that's associated with a price increase.
Oh, yeah.
So who knows? I'm speculating there, total rumor mongering. So don't take that for fact at all. But
that's really good, Wade.
But I mean, yeah, you get the vanilla, you get the caramel, get a little kind of lemon citrus, maybe.
I get a little bit of lemon citrus. For me, it's just so pleasant on the palate. I mean, it's not like beat your mouth up. It's not. It just goes down easy. I'm surprised at how easy it is to drink. I just keep getting back to price, going, man. I'm thinking it's a less expensive. I don't want to say cheap. I'm going to say a less expensive whiskey, but it drinks like much better quality than that.
Well, now let's try
That's good.
the 1989 version. Nose is completely different.
Totally different.
Much softer overall, but much more of an elegant type bourbon. More cherries.
That is softer. You're exactly right.
And this one, back then, these were age shaded. So this is age shaded 8 years. which means every drop of liquid in there was at least 8 years. The 80s were kind of a glut area time where a lot of these distilleries had even older whiskey sitting around. So while it's age stated 8, it could very well have, 8, 10, 12-year-old bourbons mixed into this.
And that was kind of because they were kind of in a lull for bourbon at that time, and so they sat on a lot of stuff. And instead of letting it get too woody in the barrel, they would just bottle it in lower end brands. Yeah. Wow. And you've had this bottle how long? Since the 80s?
No, I haven't had that bottle that long. I did crack it tonight.
Okay.
So,
I always wonder how people get their hands on stuff like this. I mean, I see other friends of mine that have cool stuff like that. I'm like, how the hell do you get that, man? You know people.
I do have some older Wild Turkey bottles that I did buy myself. I lived in Seattle for 9 years, but I moved back to Texas in 2007, 2008 kind of time frame. And at that time, you could do some dusty hunting, which I did, and I found some like Cheesy Goldful Wild Turkeys on the shelf, some split labels. So I did find some bottles, and matter of fact, those are what I was looking for. This regular Wild Turkey 101, I kind of just left sitting there. So I could have bought them.
Yeah.
They were out there at the time, but I think I know I bought that one on a secondary site. So
that's really good, though. That's different. They're both completely different, and they're 16, 17 years apart as far as production. Going to the bottom.
Longer than that. I mean, this is 89, so 2020. That's 31 years.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, this one, the glass says 89, the bottom of the glass.
Okay.
So that's how I'm dating that one, but that should be correct. And this one I know is a current product.
And the current one, we don't know the age of that.
It has a funky age
6 to 8
statement
years,
on it.
you think?
Yeah, it has. I'll read the age statement. Because I've kind of complained about this age statement, but this iconic bourbon is perfectly aged for up to 6 to 8 years in American oak barrels. So it kind of wants to imply that it's 6 to 8 years old, but then it says up to, which confuses you.
Some might be, some aren't.
It's a weird labeling. But I believe that it's mostly 6 to 8 years old. And I've been drinking Wild Turkey for a long, long time. I will say that I think in the past 3 to 4 years that the standard Wild Turkey 101 has gotten better. I think it's probably gotten a little older.
Okay.
And that kind of correlates to when Wild Turkey did their last major expansion, that they're going to have more whiskey kind of in this range that's available now.
Yeah.
So that's what I think is happening with Wild Turkey. Same thing with Rare Breed. I think Rare Breed, they have batches of it. The current batch is like 116.8 proof. The previous one was like 112. Before that, it was like 108 for years. But I think each one has gotten a little better. I think it's probably because they're blending in a little older whiskey in the mix.
So let me ask you on Wild Turkey. So the 101, obviously, I've been shown today. It's good. It's really good. Rare Breed's good and a good value for that price. Is there a point in the Wild Turkey family or any other bourbon family where you go, this is kind of your sweet spot? Anything above that, you're paying too much. Stay right here, young man.
Wild Turkey's done some other releases in the past 3 or 4 years.
I think in decades.
They did one called Diamond, which I was totally unimpressed with. They've done a couple under the Russell's Reserve line, which is Wild Turkey's kind of secondary line. But they've done a couple of those, a 1998, I think, Russell's Reserve, and a 2002. And both those were absolutely fantastic.
Really?
And they were pretty expensive. I think the first one was like $200 at retail.
Okay.
But I don't have any. I tried them at a bar. I never saw one at retail. They were very limited and hard to come by.
So there is some quality stuff as you get, it's worth the money is my point. Okay. I just always wondered if, because I've not bought a lot of bottles, but I bought a few that are, over $100 a bottle, and I wonder, am I paying more than I need to for something that's not that much better than I can get 2 bottles at $50?
Yeah. One of my favorite all-time Wild Turkey products was one called Wild Turkey Tribute.
Okay.
I believe it came out in 2005, and it was a 15-year version. Did two versions of it. One went to Japan, and it was in the Kentucky Spirit bottle that had the kind of the wing shape on the edges, and the other was in the more traditional tube-shaped bottle that was just a U.S. release.
Okay.
And I preferred the U.S. over it, but they're both very, very good. And those retailed at the time for about $79. But, that was...
If you found it now secondary, can you find it now?
Yeah, they're out there. They're about $1,200.
Oh, wow.
But it is one of my top 3 all-time favorite bourbons there is that Wild Turkey Tribute.
Okay.
I opened up one last year and went through it pretty quick. shared it with a couple of bottle share type events, but still have a few left. But.
So Brant King, Brant, was nice enough to share a pour with me of the 1855 from 1994, which I thought was just fantastic. Probably the great bourbon. I mean, it's just awesome.
Well, did he tell you what 1855 really was?
No, so that's what I'm going to get to, because I've heard it's really good, but what is that? What is it all about?
It basically is a version of Rare Breed that they created for the export market, the duty-free export market. So it was very, very similar to the Rare Breed version back then. So, and if you can find some of those early on Rare Breeds from that same year, they're going to taste about identical. So
really?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So,
okay. So the two you talked about, the Tribute, one was Asian market, one was here in the States.
Yes.
You said you liked the States one better.
I did a little bit.
Was the proof similar?
The Japanese one was actually higher.
Was it really?
Yeah. I'm forgetting what the U.S. one was. I think it was 110. I could go downstairs and look at a bottle, but and I know the Japanese one was, I believe, it was more barrel strength. I know it was a higher
130,
proof.
somewhere around there.
Because Wild Turkey, they went into the barrel at a much lower proof.
Oh, okay, still
so
back.
Their barrel proofs were never going to be like you saw.
122, so maybe?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, current Rare Breed is barrel proof is at 116. So
that's barrel proof?
Yeah.
Okay.
And a lot of the Russell's Reserve releases, at 110, they're right at barrel proof. They're a few points higher. So Wild Turkey's barrel proofs are some of the lower ones in the industry because they go into the barrel lower.
Okay. Did not realize that. So 101, Rare Breed, 2 that people should value, bang for your buck, absolutely, all day.
Definitely.
Okay.
If you like making bourbon cocktails, it's a great mixer for that too, because it's got enough proof to hold up to a cocktail, and it's economical enough to use for that as well.
So first time I've had the 101, and I got to say, I'm impressed. First time I've had it, and it's really good. And I've been kind of a snob about not buying it because I thought, price point wise, it wasn't going to be very good just by seeing the price, but no. So, all right, what do you want to try next?
Well, I'm going to finish this sample here. I've been talking too much. I got to drink some.
Well, you also have a big boy glass, and I'm doing the wee Glen, so
the audience can't see that.
I drove to your house.
He's got the little mini Glencairns that can fit in your pocket real easy. I'm drinking out of the standard size one.
You just need to roll down into the bed. That's all you got to do. I got to drive all the way back out to Katy.
Well, another thing I brought out, thought we open up today, is this year's George T. Stagg.
I haven't had this one yet. This is 116.8, right?
Yeah, this is the lowest, 116.9.
0.9, okay.
But it's by far the lowest Stagg release.
I've noticed that it's the last 3 or 4 years specifically, it's went down 7-8 points every year.
And it's interesting. It is a barrel-proof release, so they take these barrels and they don't add any waters to it.
Okay.
And they publish where they pull these barrels from, the floors of the warehouses, and what warehouses. And there hasn't been really big changes as far as that goes. Also on the age, they're in that same 15-year age range. So I don't know why the proof has been dropping, but...
You don't read too much into that. Next year it could be 135 again.
I think it probably will be.
Okay.
So...
Okay.
I guess some people could think, well, they're cheating and watering it down so they can stretch it and have more bottles, but I don't think that's the case.
Wasn't it you who also told me, getting back to how many cases, barrels, didn't they kind of stopped publicizing that now?
That is true. They used to publicize exactly how many barrels were dumped, and then they had the evaporation, the angel share. And with those two pieces of information, you could basically determine pretty close count on how many bottles were released.
Yeah.
And this year was the first year that in all the BTAC, they elected not to share the number of barrels. So you can't kind of back your way into that information anymore. So maybe they weigh up the ante or not. But this year I've tried most of the BTAC collection. I have not had the William Ruley Weller yet, but I've tried most of the others. The Handy, it's kind of a little disappointed in.
Really?
Mainly,
I've heard a couple people
mainly
say.
because last year's Handy was so good. Last year's Handy to me was one of the best years of it. So tasting this year's, I was hoping it was going to taste like last year's, and it was a different profile. So it was kind of
Your expectations were too high.
yeah.
Had I known you had not had the William LaRue, I actually had a bottle of that, and I would have brought that, darn it, next time, for sure. So I'm hearing a lot of people say last few years, this is their favorite stag release. And you have an opinion on that? I mean, do you?
I'm
Thank you.
going to be honest with you. I've never had a bad year stag.
Okay.
I know there are people that talk about, well, certain years are so much better than others. To me, they've never bottled a bad one.
Okay.
So you're talking about different degrees of how good it is, in my opinion.
Okay.
So
I think that's a fair statement. I think most people would agree with that. They just don't realize they're not saying it that way.
one of my top 3 all-time favorite bourbons is the very first year of Stag, the 2002, which was the first release of it.
Is that just Stag, or is that BTAC as a collection?
The BTAC itself started in 2000.
In 2000?
Yeah, at that point it was 3 whiskeys. They had a 19-year-old Weller, and they had the Eagle Rare 17, and they had the Sazerac 18.
Okay.
Well, they dropped
The Weller.
the Weller 19, which I've had before. It was way over oaky for it.
Okay.
And in 2002 they added the Stag. And then in 2005 they added the William Ruley Weller at the barrel proof. And then in 2006 they added the Handy.
Okay.
And then last year they changed the Eagle Rare from 90 to 100 or 101 proof. So they bumped up the Eagle Rare 17. And the Eagle Rare 17 was also part of the original collection in 2000. So, but anyway, 2002 was the first year of the Stag. And part of it might be because that was when I was really getting into bourbon, kind of making my first trip to Kentucky and first time really tasting some of the Buffalo Trace Antique collection.
Yeah.
So my memory of it is really positive. And your palate's affected by a lot of things, but it's like if you're sitting in a rick house of a bourbon distillery and tasting through barrels there, they always taste pretty damn good.
Sure.
If you're with a big group of friends and you're having fun,
It tastes better.
It tastes a little better.
Yeah.
So that's probably my memory associated with the 2002. But for Stag, Stags generally are kind of punchy in your face, super high proof. This one's very approachable. I know it's a lot lower proof, but boy, it doesn't need any water at all whatsoever to me. Ever been to Kentucky?
Not yet, but it is on my list of things to do. I'm going to drag my wife along, who doesn't drink an ounce of bourbon. So, unless I can find some dudes who want to go hang out and hit the bourbon trail.
Well, the first trip I made was with my wife, and I drug her along.
Yeah.
We did a couple other things that were outside the bourbon trail, and she saw the people I was hanging out with back there, all the bourbon geeks. And she goes, "Yeah, you can make this a guy's trip. You can go on your own from now on."
I'm out.
I'm out. So
that may be what happens. She's probably going to listen to this, so it's probably take her the first time, and then she's going to go, "No, I don't want to do this anymore." But if I don't ever take her, so why don't you take me? Why don't you take me? Right? So,
take her the
first time. Yeah. Sorry, babe. Because she's going to listen to this way.
Yeah, it's not a lot of strip bars in Louisville.
There are a lot?
No, they're not.
Oh, okay.
Well, I don't know. Never been any. I don't think there are. It's about drinking bourbon back there, not about much of anything else.
Man, thank you for sharing that. That's really good.
That little small sample went quick. You want a little more? Help yourself.
Yeah, I may take a little bit more weight with this little baby glass I got. Okay, to a young bourbon drinker trying to get into bourbon, is there a way to properly smell, taste, and try to figure out what you have, what you're drinking, flavors you're getting, or is it just everybody's palate's different and it is what it is?
Well, the first thing that you got to teach kind of uneducated whiskey or spirit drinkers, if you're used to drinking wine, is a lot of people can't get past the alcohol. Mm-hmm. That's all they taste, and some of them try to take the sample in the glass and get it down their throat without touching their tongue at all because they're just trying to shoot it and say, and if they don't have any burn to it, that's when they say, "Ooh, that's smooth."
Yeah.
Which us whiskey geeks kind of hate that word because it really means, what does that mean? What does smooth taste like?
Yeah.
So the first thing is kind of learning how to try a product, and I kind of recommend if you're brand new to it, adding water, cut it down. You take an 80 proof bourbon, cut it in half of water so you get 40 proof. Then learn to, number one, nose it. And when you nose it, unlike a wine that you want to stick your nose down in there, you don't really want to do that. You just want to get the glass close to your nose and have your mouth open and breathe through your nose and out through your mouth is the best way to do a whiskey. But then when you take a sip, you're taking a very small sip, maybe the size of a pea.
Okay.
And you learn to chew on it like a piece of hard candy. You're swirling it back and forth over your tongue and your top of your mouth, just kind of chewing on that
Leave
candy.
it in your palate.
Leave it in your palate, and your body will naturally respond and produce more saliva, which will lower the proof even further, and then you'll be able to start picking up the notes that are really associated with that whiskey, whether it's got caramel or violets or other type of notes to it. But if all you're tasting is alcohol, you're never going to get to that point.
Right.
So over time, you'll learn you won't have to add as much water. You'll learn to take smaller sips and to be able to pick up those notes. But first thing you got to do is learn how to taste the spirit, neat without just swallowing it completely at first glance. So
I think that's great advice because I think you're right. I think a lot of people, they're curious, they're interested, their friends are drinking it, whatever, and they want to get into it, but just aren't sure how to do it. So,
but then past that, once you start getting a little bit more advanced, you see some of these tasters, and they're picking up all kinds of just crazy notes, and you taste and you think, well, I don't taste that.
Okay, good. I'm glad you said that, not me, because I'm like, I get a couple things here and there. Pretty much it's similar depending on the profile of the whiskey, but not huge off-the-wall kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, there are some whiskeys to me that I do. Jim Beam products, like, a lot of times I pick up Peanut, MGP Rye, the 95.5 Rye mash bill. To me, that is spearmint with little dill pickles. George Dickel, to me, has this Fred Flintstone vitamin note.
Yep.
So there are certain whiskeys that, to me, have a taste profile that I can pick up on.
Am I weird that I like that George Dickel, Fred Flintstone? Okay.
I do enjoy it, too.
Yeah, I do, too.
And you get past that note, there's some other really good flavors in it, too. But that's kind of the first thing people associate it with. But you don't have to taste what everybody else is tasting. You really have to decide for yourself whether it's a good whiskey or not. What I think can help, there are some bourbon flavor wheels. You can Google that on the internet, and you can print out a piece of paper that kind of shows you the traditional kind of flavor profiles. And as you're tasting it, if you're looking at a piece of paper saying, these are more the traditional profiles, I think it helps your mind then look at that whiskey that you got in your mouth and say, well, I can see where this one comes up. As compared to you're just a totally blank, and what does this taste like? Yeah,
because whiskey will, or sometimes I'll have a friend going, okay, I'm getting something, and they'll say, I'm getting this, and I'll go, that's what it is. And then it kind of triggers that that's the flavor I'm getting there. But, yeah, I just thought that would be good to let people know that there is a way to drink it the right way. You just don't put it in and chug it. You need to, I think sometimes people think whiskey, it's a shot, right? Get it in your mouth and down your throat as quick as you can, and if you're going to enjoy it the way, people like us who enjoy bourbon, that's not the right way to drink it.
Yeah, and I would say the majority of people are that way. They're wanting to take a shot and throw it back.
Yeah.
And, I'm the opposite. If you give me something to drink, I want to taste it.
Yeah.
I go to bars, my friends try to buy me shots. It's like, I don't want a shot.
Yeah.
Buy me something I can sip on.
And
I'll consume it.
I even nose it for a while. I mean, sometimes I just like it so much on the nose that it'll take me 10 minutes. My wife will laugh. Are you going to drink that? And I go, give me a minute. I mean, it's just pleasant to me on the nose. And
Another trick that people do use, if you want to help pick up more flavors on the nose, is you can take a very small amount and put it in the palm of your hands and rub it until it starts turning dry and a little sticky. And then at that point, take your hands up to your nose and smell, and you can pick up kind of more of a nosing portion.
Does that help get rid of the alcohol? Is that what that's doing? Okay.
So you're kind of burning off the alcohol and leaving behind the whiskey. It's kind of the same thing if you've ever left a glass of whiskey out that had a little thing in it, a little
Just
pour.
was going to mention that.
And then the next morning you wake up and it's kind of dried, and you look at it, kind of looks gross, kind of gets cloudy, but you smell it and you thought, man.
So you know what I recently did that with? That '06 Stag that you gave me that pour of. I saved that glass till the next morning. I had my wife smell it, and she went, my goodness, this smells great. I mean, it was phenomenal. It really wasn't. You pick up so much of what's in there versus just, that fighting through that alcohol. Is that what it is?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it also shows you bourbon can be used in cooking, because cooking, you're going to pull out a lot of that alcohol, but you're going to leave behind the flavor of that. So
Yeah.
there are certain dishes that you can use some whiskey in your cooking, just like you use wine for the flavoring. So
Yeah, when I make a barbecue, I put some bourbon in there and burn it off. Yeah, when I make my certain dishes. Yeah. This is great, Wade. Okay, so glasses make a difference? Depending on proof. I've heard some people say, depending on proof, certain glasses make a difference. Your opinion?
For whiskey, for wine, I agree. Yes, wine. I think the appropriate glass type can really make a difference. But for me, whiskey is not that much essential. I think for anything for nosing, certain glasses can really help you with the nosing aspect of it. But for drinking, I don't think so. My typical glass that I drink out of kind of daily is that little rocks glass right there with the Buffalo Trace logo head on it. But if I'm going to do really comparison type tasting, I will pull out a Glencairn glass if I really want to try to, score a whiskey or judge it.
Okay.
But just for daily stuff, I don't really use a Glencairn.
So why? Because it just bundles up and gives you the aromas and everything that you're looking to.
I think more on the
pick
nose
up?
than anything else.
Yeah.
So
That's kind of what I figured.
there's another glass out there. What's it called? The neat glass. Have you seen that one?
No, I don't. Well, if I have, I don't know that I have.
I think I have one.
Oh, wow, look at that.
So that's the neat glass. I think it even does a better job of nosing, but it's about impossible to taste out of because you almost got to turn the thing upside down.
Yeah, you can't see it, but this has got a rim, a lip on it that's just, that's huge, and it's very...
If they want to see it, they can Google the glass, but so it's never been my favorite.
So that, and then, I have some friends who, and I want to get one, I don't have one yet, but the Kentucky Bourbon Trails glass.
Which is made by Libby, right? I think.
Yeah. Are they the only ones who make that?
I think I have one of those too. But...
I was looking them up, and I saw them all by Libby, and I wondered, okay, is it a quality glass? Not trying to knock Libby, but I didn't know if they're in this world of making, glasses for spirits and wine and things like that. But decent glass, or?
I think they just wanted to have one for the trail themselves, but...
Okay, makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, drink out of whatever glass you like. Yeah.
Doesn't really matter.
I'm not going to judge you on that.
So is there any benefit to somebody... So my progression through bourbons and whiskeys was mixing. Coke, the bourbon, ice, and then, it was this much bourbon, this much Coke, and then finally got to here, and then I went to water. Is it okay to start like that? Does that help you at all? Is it really, you really just need to start with water and
I think,
ice?
majority of people probably started that way. I know back in college, I just didn't really like the taste of beer, but I could drink bourbon and Coke.
Yeah.
So, that was kind of my introduction to bourbon, was drinking it with Coca-Cola. And then...
But in college, you didn't even know what it was, right? You just chugging it.
I was probably drinking Weller back then. That was Stitzel Weller whiskey because it was here in Texas.
That's good stuff.
And it was the most common, cheap, available bourbon. It's crazy what we were probably drinking back then and didn't even realize it.
Yeah.
So, matter of fact, I graduated from college in '88, so I was probably drinking this Wild Turkey right here.
Yeah, you probably were, because at parties, everybody brought a bottle of Wild Turkey.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's one reason I think Wild Turkey's got this bad reputation, is so many people kind of got drunk on it at college once because they bought it and said, "Oh, it's 101 proof. This is really
strong stuff."
Right, strong stuff. So, then they shotgunned it and and got all big hungover and said, "I'll never drink a Wild Turkey again." Well,
so on that bottle, back to the Wild Turkey, Austin Nichols. What's the meaning behind? Is he somebody? Is it what is it? What is that?
No, that was one of the brands at the time.
Oh, it was a brand.
Yeah,
part of the brand.
The company that owned it.
Okay.
Don't get me lying about the history. It's gone through several changes. So
I just know, like some of the Russell's Reserve, I see Jimmy Russell on there or something. I didn't know if that was maybe some old distiller, but it's just somebody who owned it.
Yeah.
Company that owned it. Okay. Cool. So buying bourbon. If I'm a new guy going out shopping for bourbon, are you going to tell me, stay in a certain shelf range to get it? People look at, I think when they want to get into bourbons, they get into some of these bourbon groups, and they think that's the first resource to go try to learn about bourbons. And my experience was you get on there and you start seeing what people are posting about, and it's always really good stuff, right? And I'm like, okay.
And oftentimes hard to find.
And I
then
think
you get on this never-ending quest to try to find some bottle.
And that
when
was
good bottles are sitting right there and you're walking right by them.
And I'm not going to lie to you. I got into bourbon about 2 years ago, probably just less than 2 years ago, and that's my story, man. That's how I got into it. I joined Houston Bourbon Society, started seeing stuff, and said, okay, that's the stuff I got to try to find. And I think that was the wrong approach looking back now.
I have a post, I've shared it several times in HBS, but in my opinion, you should start out with the base expression from the major distilleries that have been making bourbon for a long time. So Wild Turkey, 101.
Jim Beam.
Jim Beam, I would go Jim Beam Black Label.
Okay.
Because until you know what the base expression is and kind of what that profile is, there's no sense in going up the scale. If you don't really like the base expression, you're probably not going to like the more expensive ones.
Okay.
So if you turn out to like Wild Turkey 101, well, you're probably going to like Rare Breed even better. And if you go up to the Russell's Reserve single barrels, you're going to probably like those. But if you don't like Wild Turkey 101 at all,
move on.
Those others are probably not going to be in your wheelhouse. I'm not saying don't come back to them, but try the basic expressions from all the major distilleries first, so you have a basic understanding of what their product line is. And it's also going to be the cheap way to get into it, and it's also going to be bottles that are pretty much available at every retail store out there. So you're not going to go on this big hunt. Now, whether you go buy a bottle of it or try it at a bar, either way is fine, or go to some type of bottle share or have some friends over and everybody brings one of these bottles. But try these first. Realize which one is kind of in your wheelhouse, then explore that line.
Okay.
And then beyond that, in the last 10 years, we've had this explosion of craft distilleries across the U.S.
Yes.
And they're starting to have some history behind them that, they're making some good products. So then I would start exploring some of these craft distilleries out there. In Texas, I'm part of the Texas Whiskey Association. We have 17 distilleries that are truly making whiskey grain to glass here in Texas. So, go out and try, some of their products if you live here in Texas. But to me, if you live in Montana, I'm sure you have plenty of craft distilleries up there. But most people like trying local to them type products. So
sure.
That would be kind of my next progression.
And do you find the price point at the craft distilleries is competitive? I mean, or do you find that expect to pay a little bit more if you go to, I think craft beer, I think some boutique winery, it might be a little bit more, these are smaller production, a little bit more cost.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely the case. I mean, the big Kentucky distilleries, they buy grain in huge volumes. They have huge stills, huge fermenting tanks. and they can produce whiskey for way, way lower than what a craft distillery is going to do. But also, I mean, I've been back to Buffalo Trace, and I saw corn dumped, and they're buying, agricultural grade corn. It's not the highest grade corn, and dumping out in there, and the grates that they're going through, and there's a dead mouse in there.
Oh.
Okay? And that doesn't matter. It's going to get fermented and distilled, so it's purified. So I'm not trying to freak people out about that. But the craft distillers are typically going to use a lot higher quality of grain,
right,
which is more money. They'll be making it on a pot still versus a column still. So there's a lot of difference that add to those costs. So, yeah, you're going to expect to pay more for a local craft-made product. Some people don't get that, and they don't want to pay it. And if they want to stick to Wild Turkey 101 from Kentucky, hey, more
knock
power
yourself
to
out.
No proud to you. But, yeah, so the craft guys I don't think are ever going to compete on price with the volume that the big guys do. Although the Kentucky guys keep raising prices like crazy. So they're these days, what I thought used to be the craft distillers having high prices are now looking more and more normal. So
they're evening the playing field a little bit, leveling it out. So we were talking about major distilleries, and we talked about Wild Turkey. We talked about Jim Beam. Who are the other big players? A lot of people don't know. I didn't know, know.
Well, there's 8 companies that control 13 distilleries. So those are the big ones. Sazerac is the parent company. They own 2 major distilleries in Kentucky, and that's Buffalo Trace Distillery, and they own the Barton 1792 Distillery.
Okay.
Jim Beam, which has 2 distilleries in Kentucky. You have MGP, which is based out of Indiana, but it's across the river from Kentucky. You have Four Roses, which is owned by Kirin, the Japanese company. Actually, Jim Beam, I should go back, they're owned by Beam Suntory.
Another Japanese.
Yeah, another Japanese company. And they not only own Jim Beam and their 2 distilleries, they own Maker's Mark as well.
Oh, really?
So Maker's Mark is the one under that profile, but that would be one of the major distilleries. You have Brown-Forman, which owns, obviously, Jack Daniel's and Tennessee Distillery. They own the distillery in Kentucky that makes Old Forester. It has a specific name, but I'm drawing a blank. They own the Woodford Reserve Distillery. And now they actually own one that's downtown Louisville, which is a much smaller scale, but I guess it can make about 10% of their production, more as a showcase tourist facility. You have Heaven Hill.
That's,
which their distillery is in Louisville. They don't give public tours there, but down in Bardstown they have their bottling line and their warehouses that you can go see.
And they make Heaven Hill.
Evan Williams.
Elijah Craig.
Parker's Heritage Collection. William Heaven Hill. All these distilleries have multiple lines. I'm trying to focus on naming the 8 companies and the 13 distilleries.
I put you on the spot.
So I mentioned Four Roses. I mentioned Woodford, Wild Turkey,
Jim Beam,
Barton, Old Forester. I think I'm covering it. I'm probably missing one.
That's most of them.
I'm not looking at the list. But
so it's 8 that really produce.
8 companies that own 13 distilleries.
And produce 85%, 80%? How much of the bourbon that?
I bet they produce 95%.
Not that much.
Yeah. And if you consider that Jack Daniel's is really a bourbon.
What? What?
What? Yes, Jack Daniel's is really a bourbon.
No, people tell me it's not.
They just elect not to call it that. But if you consider that,
they meet all the requirements.
They're the world's largest selling whiskey.
Yeah.
And so if you include that in the bourbon category, then they make, probably 98, 99%. So
I think, didn't you post a picture of a label from them that said bourbon on it?
Yeah.
I thought that conversation was going around last week, whenever it was.
Yeah, so. If you want to get a good discussion going on any Facebook group ever, just say Jack Daniel's is or is not a bourbon, and no matter what, you'll have 100 comments within an hour.
So something I learned recently about that I had no clue, and I'm going to tell you, I'm probably a bit of a snob, because I think certain, Jim Beam, Wild Turkey, again, I looked at price, Jack Daniel's, and went, okay, I don't want to start there, because, again, I thought I needed to start somewhere else as far as getting into bourbons. So I never had a Jim Beam product that I knew of until I found out that Booker's and Baker's and Knob Creek and all this is part of that family. How'd that come about?
Yeah, I tell you my story on that too. Dating myself, but yeah, I was the same way. I mean, I drank in the 90s, drank Knob Creek and drank these other products, and you look on the back and it says, made at the Knob Creek Distillery.
Yeah.
Well, this is pre-internet days, and so that knowledge that it really wasn't out there.
Yeah.
And I remember in about 2000 getting on the internet and saying, I'm going to find out, more about this distillery, and started doing some searching, and that's when I found out, well, the Knob Creek Distillery was just a DBA, just an assumed business name, was really part of Jim Beam. And ditto with those other brands. And it's like, man, what?
Yeah, that's how I was. I told somebody, they go, I've never had a Jim Beam. And they go, have you ever had Knob Creek? And I went, yeah. They went, and you've had Jim Beam. And I went, oh, okay, I didn't realize that. But the clue was anything with the B in it is kind of, I don't know how exactly that works. It's Knob, with the K-N-O-B, but Baker's and Booker's. And is there anything else I'm missing? Those three and anything else? That's Jim Beam?
I think those were just named after people. There was Booker, no. I think Baker was historical figure. So I think that's just totally random that it turned out to be bees. But
It is random. It
I know Basil Hayden was a real person with history in the bourbon world going back, early on. So.
And that's the other one that's Jim Beam, Basil Hayden.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other ones? Those four.
Yeah, I mean, now they make Legend as a new series.
Oh,
I mean,
okay.
they have a lot of diversification. But one thing to keep in mind is Jim Beam basically makes 2 bourbon mash bills. One's a high rye and another's the low rye. The high rye makes Old Grandad and Basil Hayden.
Okay.
So if people like Basil Hayden, it tends to be on the more spendy side. I always tell them to try. So you should try Old Grandad. You can buy Old Grandad 100 for $21 a bottle,
and it's good. I've had that.
It's good. Or the 114 proof Old Grandad for like 23.
Yeah.
So, but then the other recipe makes all the rest of the products. Although there is some variation of what they come off the still now and what they go into the barrels for those different products.
Okay.
It's the same mash bill, but they do vary some other steps in the process to come up with those products.
So I'm going to jump around. I'm pivoting here, Wade. Is that why, jumping back to Buffalo Trace, you've got the same mash bill, but you've got, Blanton's, Elmer T. Lee, Hancock, Rock Hill Farms,
Ancient H&H.
There's a fifth one?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know that one. Okay. But they all are a little different, but same mash bill.
Okay, the history of that, one of the owners of that distillery before Sazerac bought it was a company called Ancient Age International. Okay. The distillery at one point was actually called the Ancient Age.
Okay.
And they developed the mash bill that made the products that went into those 5 whiskeys: Elmer T. Lee, Rock Hill Farm, Blanton's, Hancock's, and Ancient H&H. Okay? And there was another Buffalo Trace mash bill that's just a few points difference in the rye. So there's not a huge difference in these.
Okay.
That make the rest of the line. That make George T. Stagg, Buffalo Trace, Eagle Rare, all the other products. Except for the Weller line is a wheated bourbon, so a wheated mash bill. So I'm just talking about the rye. So they had these 2 mash bills. But anyway, when this Ancient Age sold the company to Sazerac, they kept the rights to the mash bill that made those 5 whiskeys. So Sazerac actually doesn't own those brands, but they obviously make the products for them. They market the product for them in the U.S., and so that's kind of the difference between the 2.
Okay.
So I don't think most people realize they're actually not owned by them, but
I didn't know that.
Yeah, so it's one Japanese guy now technically owns it, but I don't know the details of the contract of exactly how that works, but I just do know that historical basis of the.
So bourbon, is there one thing that you would say people have a misconception on that they really don't know until somebody like you can straighten them out on it? Is there something in the bourbon world that, I don't know what it would be related to. Is there anything that you ever go, people never know this until, me or somebody who has a little bit of experience and knowledge can kind of set them straight?
The common misconception is bourbon has to come from Kentucky. You know,
Yeah.
you hear that a lot, and it's just uneducated because it has never been that.
Never, ever.
Never, ever has it been that. You could always make bourbon anywhere, and since 1962, when it became the declared national spirit of America through a proclamation by Lyndon B. Johnson, a Texan, by the way, that it had to be made only in America. But yeah, so I get that, and then some people say, well, I only like Kentucky bourbon. But then I say, oh, you never tried MGP, which is made right across the river from Indiana, and they probably like a lot of those products,
Sure.
like Bell Mead, and it's like, that's not Kentucky. No.
Yeah, that's a good one too. Yeah, I only like Kentucky bourbon. Something I learned was, and I know you know this, that Bourbon County in Kentucky, not allowed to make bourbon there. You know the story behind that?
No.
No?
I don't. I don't know if that's even true. Is that
Is it
true?
not true? I read that,
Bourbon County, the geographic lines of what is defined as Bourbon County has changed significantly over time.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, don't ask me if it's true. I read that, and I'm not saying everything you read on the internet's accurate, but I thought that was curious that, they said, bourbon is named after Bourbon County in Kentucky.
no, that's false.
It is false.
Well, bourbon's not named after Bourbon County.
What's it named after? Does it come from France?
Well, it's debatable, but you have the Elijah Craig story that he shipped bourbon in a charred oak barrel down the Mississippi, and when it got to Louisiana, to Bourbon County, that's where they were drinking it, so maybe it comes from there. There's a lot of possible explanations to
No
it.
definitive answer.
There's no definitive answer to it.
Okay.
But to say that Bourbon County is the answer is also kind of probably misleading.
Okay, well, that's good to know. See, I'm getting more educated, Wade, because I read that and just assumed, okay, it was a bourbon article or whatever it was, and so I thought, okay, it's got to be accurate.
Don't believe things you
Made
read on
sense.
Don't believe things you read on the internet.
Nothing? Even comments on Facebook pages?
A lot of them.
All right, what else?
There is a lot of bad information out there. I mean, I've been to, kind of some well-known sites, and even major distilleries, and they've updated them since, but had wrong information about the definition of bourbon.
Yeah.
So it's
And, I read that article and was curious to go, okay, that's kind of cool where it got named. And now that you tell the story about it, Elijah Craig and sending it down the Mississippi to Louisiana, I'm going to start telling that story. I like that one better.
what's kind of funny is, people have these online discussions, and I'll say, no, here's the fact. And they'll try to come back to me and say, take a snip off of some website and say, no, you're wrong, here it is. And I said, well, here's my source. It's the actual federal code written in law. Here it is.
Yeah.
And they think some random website is better than
Some
federal
guy
code.
posted it on his website, yeah. Well, they don't want to be wrong, right?
That's true.
That's what it is. That's what it boils down to.
When you tell anybody that they're wrong, the first thing they do, they get their defenses get all worked up.
Absolutely. Human nature.
Human nature.
So.
Chris Hart and I joke about it. It's called doubling down.
Yep.
So, yeah, if you tell someone wrong, and
They want to double down. That's when they start blasting all kinds of stuff. Yeah. Yeah. What else we want to talk about, Wade? What else can you educate me on?
let's have another pour.
Okay. What do you want to try?
When I have visitors over, this is kind of my little bourbon cabinet that's all open bottles. I'll show you my bunker later, but these are my open bottles. So anything in there, we're welcome to try. And you pick a bottle, and I'll see what I can tell you about it.
Okay, let's
So
do
just
that.
go over there and take a look. You don't mind a little dead air, you can edit this out while you take.
All right, what did I pick out here?
We are going to try a Smooth Amber Old Scout, 10-year-old whiskey, and this is from a liquor store called Kenwood Liquors, which I forget exactly where they are. I think they're up in the mid-northwest.
So this isn't
Midwest,
a
actually.
barrel pick like you see today with,
This was a
liquors.
barrel pick.
It was a barrel pick.
This
So they were
was a-
doing them what year is this from? If you had to guess. I mean,
2014.
Oh, okay, that recently.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
The label caught my eye, and it looked a little older, and I saw that Kenwood Liquors, and for whatever reason, I thought it was a little older bottle.
I'm guessing they're on the year. I could be off a couple, but let me
Not
tell
that
you
old.
a little bit about Smooth Ambler.
Okay.
They are a craft distillery out of West Virginia, and they, like many craft distilleries, realized they probably needed some whiskey to sell to fund it while they were building up their own stocks.
Sure.
So they went out and sourced whiskey. They were some of the first that started sourcing whiskey from MGP in Indiana, that they're bourbon, and they sourced a lot of rye. But unlike many at that time, they were pretty transparent about what they were selling. They called the product Old Scout, was their label for source whiskey. We went out and scouted and found this whiskey.
Oh, nice. Okay.
So they were never trying to hide the fact that they were selling someone else's whiskey. A lot of
Transparent
companies,
about
especially
that.
back then, were not so transparent about what they were doing. Like the other one kind of back in that time frame that kind of got into trouble, well, did have to settle a class action lawsuit, was Templeton Rye.
Yep.
Because they were buying the rye whiskey from MGP, but they weren't. They were pretending they were making it then, and they were in Iowa. So these guys, the two Johns there, are great guys, and they were honest about what they were selling. And back then, MGP whiskey was much easier to attain, and they were selling most of these picks in the 8 to 11-year-old range for $55 a bottle.
Oh, wow.
So, it was reasonable price. Kenwood, in particular, this is one of the very first ones picked. It's always kind of been one of my favorites. So this is 122.4. Is your eyesight better than me, Proof?
124.4.
Okay, 100, yeah.
124.4.
10 years old, barrel 378. So it's MGP bourbon.
So as long as places are honest about having sourced their whiskey, it's okay. Nothing wrong with that.
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's necessary for somebody getting started.
Yeah. But these guys were very successful at it. They actually wound up being purchased by Pernod Ricard, one of the largest spirit companies in the world. At least has a majority stake in Smooth Ambler now. So now they got a lot more money behind them. Unfortunately, they bottled up pretty much all their stocks that they had of this older MGP. They bought a bunch of stocks 5 years ago from MGP that were, new make, that now are turning 5 and 6 years old.
Oh, wow.
So they're reintroducing the line, but now with more 5 and 6 year old bourbon, which can be 6 years old is a good age for bourbon.
Okay.
Most master distillers will actually tell you 6 to 8 years old is the
Sweet spot?
sweet spot. In Kentucky, anyhow. The climates vary
Sure.
and things, and where you're aging in a rick house. I tend to believe it's probably more like 8 to 10 for my taste profile. But anyway, it becomes much more mature. 4-year-old Kentucky whiskeys, I can taste typically that they taste on the young side.
Okay.
Yeah, to me.
Because they just haven't been in the wood long enough to get those
Haven't-
characteristics of the wood.
Yeah.
Okay. This is really good.
Yeah.
For source,
Yeah.
I mean,
MGP bourbon, I've always thought it can be average to good. I've never really just thought it was just like excellent, just kind of blow me off my doors. But I've always, the best of it is kind of really good.
and did Old Scout every year get a particular same batch, same from... How does it work when you source from NGP? I mean, how many mash bills do they have? How many recipes are they putting together?
You can go to the MGPI website, and they have a breakdown of it all, and they have a lot.
Okay, I would have to think they do.
Mainly because about 5 years ago, they started distilling like 6 new mash bills. So all those whiskeys are starting to come of age.
Okay.
So they have a weeded bourbon now. They have their rye for a long time was the 95.5 rye mash bill, so 95%.
That's a lot of rye.
Yeah, it is. That's the one I didn't care for. It's really many to me. But they have like a low rye that's like 51% rye. and 49% corn.
So it's
or
just
some
right
barley.
at meeting a rye.
Yeah, it's called the barely legal rye type,
Okay.
which is what traditionally the Kentucky distilleries made for their ryes. Wild Turkey Rye and Jim Beam Rye and those guys.
Right at 51%?
Yeah, they just made the barely legal amount of rye. What were we talking about? I lost my thought.
Yeah, me too. Does that mean something with the number of pours we've had? I don't know, Wade. So my question was, do they get this, all the different mash bills at MGP? I mean, I'm going, a lot of people source from there, and you don't, different labels, same juice in every bottle. It can't be that way. I mean, how do they differentiate themselves? Is it the same juice in every bottle, different label?
Well, every barrel age is a little different.
Okay.
I've been back like picking OWA barrels at Buffalo Trace, and they're going to roll out 8 barrels for you to taste from, and they'll pull 5 barrels that I can tell from the lettering on the barrels. They sat next to each other in the rick house. Well, same row, same everything. They pulled all 5 of these barrels at one time.
That's not good, I wouldn't think.
Well, no, you'd sit there and taste through 5, and you think they would all taste identical. They were filled on the same
Right.
day. They don't.
Really?
Yeah.
See, that was my first thought. No, that wouldn't be good. They're all going to be too close to each other.
Yeah. The barrel.
Totally different.
Where they pull the wood from, how long does it age. I mean, yeah, it's crazy how much different there can be in that situation. So, yeah, all these people that are buying from MGP, are they all selling the exact same whiskey? No. Also, some of them are doing some blending. So they'll buy 2 different mash bill bourbons and blend them, and that ratio that they're blending them at is kind of unique to them. That's what Bell Mead, that company out of Tennessee, that was their kind of what they were doing. So
that makes sense.
They source initially from
That's how you create your own flavor then.
Yeah, you create your own profile through blending. So there's other ways you can take someone else's whiskey and kind of make it your own.
Okay, that makes sense. Very cool. I like the story on Old Scout. I've heard about that brand. I've never had it. And now kind of being told that's what the brand meant was we're out scouting for some bourbon to put in a bottle.
What you'll find around town, I think, at least maybe still like at Specs downtown, is they have, for a while, Old Scout sourced from some Tennessee whiskey. It's obviously Dickel.
Okay.
And they had a little different label on it. It had like a red line kind of halfway through the bottle because they didn't want people confused that it was MGP whiskey. So
that was kind of their indicator?
That was their indicator. And obviously it said on the back that it was Tennessee whiskey. Yeah. So, again, they weren't trying to hide the fact. But that's what you can see out there right now. And like I said, the new MGP stuff that they're bringing up to age, I know they've released some barrels recently in a few states. So maybe that'll work its way down to Texas here soon enough. So.
Okay, very cool.
How long have we gone for?
We've been going for 1 hour and 7 minutes.
That's really it. I really like talking about whiskey, and I like sharing it with friends too. So we're doing both those here today.
Absolutely.
So.
I mean, my thing is food, wine, and whiskey, and to me, all 3 of those things are about just bringing people together and hanging out and enjoying all of them. So that's what my wife and I. That's what we love to do, man. Just get together, socialize, drink, and hang out. All right, you had me pick. I don't know this great collection that you have here. If you were to pick one out to just kind of go, you're not going to have a clue what this is.
Let's do Ancient Age.
Okay.
So this is, we're going to taste the Ancient Age, which is one of those 5 recipes of Blanton's, Hancock, Rockhill Farms, Elmer T. Lee. This is the other product in that group. These days, Ancient Age is a lower-end product. It's aged, I think it's age-stated 36 months.
Okay.
And it's typically sold in the 1.75-liter plastic bottle.
Okay.
So it's the kind of the lower end.
Price range?
Under $20
a
bottle, and pretty young whiskey. But what I have here is the Ancient Age 10-year age-stated product at...
I'm guessing it'd be low 90s?
86 proof.
86, okay.
But this one was Kentucky only, basically. And they've discontinued this now. They probably discontinued it 6 years ago. But back then in Kentucky, this was about the same price point, but you could buy a 10-year-old whiskey. This was like $13 a bottle for a $7.50.
Is that right?
Yeah.
As
so
recently as how long ago?
6-7 years ago. But
Wow.
Kentucky only.
Right.
So it was never a wide distribution, and it was kind of like, oh, we're doing our favor for our local Kentucky folks.
Is it one that you can get it in the store though, over there?
6-7 years ago, yes.
Yeah.
You
So
go
if
out
you
and
went to
start
the
buying-
Kentucky Bourbon Trail, would that have been one that you'd try to get and bring back?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. This is one of that. Yeah, a few products that I would. This is one I would always stock up on.
Okay.
But now I'm down to 6-7 years later, and I'm down to my last bottle.
That's it?
That's it.
Man, very nice of you to share. Yeah, I figured it was going to be that low 90 or high 80 proof, just like the other in that same mash bill.
So, basically it's a $13 bottle of Blanton's with more age than Blanton's, because Blanton's is only 6 to 7 years old.
Is that all it is?
Yeah.
Okay. Is Elmer T. Lee 12 years?
No.
What is it?
They're all pretty young.
They're all pretty young.
Well, none of them are age stated, right? We talked about once you get over 4 years old, that it's optional for an age statement.
Yeah.
So all of them are non-age stated. They don't carry any age statements. You know they're at least 4 years old. I know Blanton's is 6 to 7 because when I've been back there picking barrels at Buffalo Trace, some people get Blanton's picks, and they have all the barrels that are right there that are been picked, but waiting on being bottled.
Yeah.
And they got the person's name that it was going to. But the barrel has how old it was. And, when it was distilled.
They mark it on
barrel.
there. Yeah.
So you can look at it and say, well, that's 6.5 years old.
And it's still in the barrel, so you know it's going to be 6 to 7 years old when it goes in the bottle, at least.
So, I know Blanton's is that age of product. It could have been, and I suspect it was, a little older several years ago when they didn't have the allocation issues that they have now. I suspect it was more 8-year range, so I think it's probably dropped some. And taste-wise, it tastes to me like it's dropped some over the years.
So how do you get that from the taste? I'm impressed that you say that.
Well, if you try them side by side, it's pretty apparent.
It is, okay.
That's one way to do
Okay,
it.
that's a good
That's the
way to do
easy
it.
way to
Yeah.
do it. But, younger whiskeys, they just have these rough edges. They're more corn grainy, and
Okay.
it's just time in a barrel kind of takes that off.
Okay.
And that's what come distillers, I think, kind of say that 6 to 8 years. 'Cause that's the time that it really takes that off. And then the barrel notes start dominating. By the time you get up to like 17 years old, the original mash bill, I think, to me, is way less important. And then it's all about the barrel at that point. So there's a transformation point in there. It's a sweet spot that you pass at a certain point.
Is the barrel, it's new oak, does it always have to be American? Can it be French? Can it be Hungarian? Can it be something that they want to play with? Or does it have
That's
to
another common myth. People always think that it has to be American-made oak, and it absolutely does not. It can be French oak, whatever.
Yeah, whatever oak you want to use.
But here, we have plenty of oak trees
Sure.
of the right variety that grow in America. And so you start importing barrels, it gets to be a lot more costly. But there are companies that have made bourbon and French limousine oak barrels. So there's some products out there that are, at least I know, that are aging, that are in those barrels.
So tell people, what is it? I don't know what that is. French limousine oak barrels.
Yeah. Limousine oak, there's a limousine forest in France.
Just a particular part of France where they get the barrel.
And so the oak trees that go there, it's a lot finer grain.
Okay.
Typically in whiskey, I think, from what I've been told, what I've tasted anyhow, much more kind of chocolatey type notes to it.
Okay.
So, but yeah, but
you're right.
majority are American oak, but there's no regulation for it.
And it makes sense just from a financial perspective. You want to keep costs down. This is really good.
And if I had a time machine, I would go back 6-7 years ago and buy a lot more of it. It was one of those things, once they announced it had been discontinued, I think I had just gone on my Kentucky trip that year. By the time I got back there next year, of course, it was all gone off the shelves. I guess the other myth I'll dispute right now is, I see all the time, is people say, bought this bottle of bourbon, I got it home, cracked it open, had it poured, just Didn't really like it. Wasn't my cup of tea. Whatever. Said, but I opened back up a week later and had another pour, and it had completely changed. Guess it got a little oxidation in it, and boy, it's just so much better. That whiskey just really needed to open up. Well, that doesn't happen.
No.
Okay. We talked about palates earlier. I don't know if we're on there or off, but your palate changes all the time. And depending on your mood, what you had to eat before, and that whiskey had been in a barrel for 6, 8, 10 years, whatever it was. Barrels oxidize, they're open to air. And so it's already done what it's going to do as far as that goes. Cracking open the bottle.
And a week later
is not going to make a change. Okay. It doesn't. Your palate changes what happened.
That's what I would think is more likely, that the palate's changing.
So I've done testing on it. I did it at identical bottles from the same barrel, so I knew they were identical. Barrel picks, basically. At 1 month, 2 months, and at a year, with a group of 10-plus tasters tasting the open bottle versus the sealed bottle in a triangle blind test and see if they could identify which is the odd sample. And the testers can't pick it out. I couldn't pick it out.
Yeah.
So it hasn't really changed. You just think that it's changed the next day, but you have no reference point to go back to it. It's all in your mind as your reference point.
And I think you bring up a good point. It's your mood. It's what you had for lunch, what you snacked on before you made that pour, whatever it is. It's all part of affecting your palate.
Yeah. So take your whiskey, store it upright, keep it out of bright sunlight.
Don't put it in the refrigerator.
Don't put it in the refrigerator. Just keep it normal room temperature. Make sure it's got a tight seal. If the cork is loose, try to find a replacement cork. If there's some old bottle corks kind of shrivel up. But if it's got a screw cap, make sure it's screwed down tight. And that whiskey's going to last you a long, long time. My test went to a year. I think it goes longer. I think at eventually a point, it probably does change some.
Yeah.
Especially if you start getting down to, like this Old Scout, we've got, maybe 2 pours left in there.
Maybe 2 pours.
So this is a bottle that, if I get down to that low, I'm going to go ahead and finish that bottle off pretty soon. Or I'll if I want to keep a little bit of it, I'll pour it into a little 50 milliliter sample. But as long as the bottle's more than a third, I'm not worried about it going bad. So.
Okay. Have you ever had a bottle go bad on you where you tasted it after a number of years and went, that's bad? Okay.
I have, closest I've come to it is I bought some old decanters when they used to use the porcelain decanters when they were selling bulk era whiskey. And those things, they did breathe. And I bought some of those, they'd been in those for 30, 40 years and opened those up, and the whiskey was bad inside of it.
Right.
But who knows how long that had been bad.
Sure.
That's a little bit different way different than a glass bottle. So.
Sure. I appreciate you taking some time today and just kind of having a conversation, talking about bourbon, man. I enjoyed it a bunch, and thank you for having me out.
Okay, you bet.
Thanks, everybody, for listening to this episode of Food, Wine, and Whiskey in Your Own Backyard. And until our next episode, enjoy your next pour.
Cheers.